that's actually just what I wanted to comment on, that there's two types of acceptance that is important for your anxiety disorder. There's acceptance of the anxious thoughts, feelings, and sensations in the present moment, but there's also acceptance of the disorder overall, and the realization that anxiety disorders and OCD are chronic intermittent conditions that typically peak and pass throughout people's lives, but definitely come back at different times when you're sensitized. And so the thinking there, as we've talked about before, is that anxiety disorders are genetic conditions that are also informed by nurture, or like in the environment that you grow up in. And so it's often that having kind of a sticky mind runs in families and is like if one of your parents was a worrier, one of your parents had unwanted intrusive thoughts and compulsive behaviors in response, then you not only get kind of that sticky mind from them, but you also kind of learn their behaviors as you're growing up, making it more likely for you to have beliefs like, if I have a thought, then I better pay attention to it. And that is going to then be more likely for you to have an anxiety disorder as you grow up. So the concept of accepting that you have an anxiety disorder is kind of based in this awareness that there is a genetic component to it. And so when your body is under stress, or what we call sensitized, you're likely to get a sticky mind again. And then you might have new content or themes, like you might be worried about something different, but the same processes are likely to occur again. So it sounds like you've done a really good job in preparing for the anxious moment. You first have to accept that anxiety is a possibility for you and that it might come back. So you have to know your triggers, because you have to accept that it might come back. So do you want to say anything about that? Has that been part of your journey at all, to like accept that you have an anxiety disorder?
Yes, actually, and the OCD part, I always initially, like when I started thinking, talking more about the OCD and having it before Huddle, mainly with my one sister-in-law, she was so helpful in that area. But I always thought of it as something that it has to be an outward behavior. One of my outward behaviors is that if I'm anxious, I jog. I jog in the house, I'll jog around. But other than that, I thought, well, I never really understood that intrusive thinking is a big part of it too. It's not just what the outward behavior is, the internal, and that has been a huge help. And there was a time when, even when I was beginning to think, well, okay, I have OCD, I always wanted to negate the thought that it could be a genetic component. It was like, oh, well, it was something in my environment, or it had to be related to trauma, or whatever the stress was in my life at the time. But now I realize that it's, it can be that and both. It can be both, and that's been really freeing to accept that and not see it as a fault or like a flaw. And actually, I'd say since I've been going to Huddle and being able to talk about it, and as I understand it and hear other people, like on the both on the podcast and in the blog, but hearing the others in the groups talk, and I almost look forward to it, because there's a feeling of like you're not alone, and hearing other people's success or struggles, it's really helped. A lot.
And it sounds like, so has it specifically helped you accept your anxiety disorder in addition to making you feel better about it? So yeah, do you want to comment at all more on what is it helping you with in terms of your process?
It's helping me not to be afraid to when I recognize it's my anxiety, I think it's helping me to have more of a voice, like be able to speak what's on my mind, even if I get anxious. Like I think because the anxiety in the past caused me to avoid certain situations, especially if I thought there would be that I'd be uncomfortable. I avoided them altogether. You know, I avoided anything that would be a uncomfortable conversation, if at all possible, you know. And just of recent, I think it's been more in the last month or two, I find more and more that that I'm able to speak what's really on my mind. And not only am I able to do it, but it's important to do it. It's important for my relationships. It helps me gain confidence about myself. And I think it's also helping me to be more compassionate with myself, you know, and not so hard on myself, that I don't have to agree with everything. I don't have to, if somebody doesn't like something, it really is okay. I might not feel good about it, but unless I'm doing something that really is harmful or adverse to my character, I don't have to worry if it's not the same thinking as someone else.
Yeah, it absolutely makes sense. And, you know, conflict avoidance is a really great example of a subtle way that those that suffer from anxiety often avoid, but don't notice it as part of their anxiety disorder. They might think it's part of their character, personality, or they don't even really notice that they're avoiding conflict because they're so used to it. But so everybody with an anxiety disorder avoids, but not everybody avoids behaviorally. And since a lot of people with anxiety disorders have a lot of perfectionism too, they'll kind of white knuckle their way through situations. So like you used the example before with work, rather than behaviorally avoiding work, you might over prepare and get reassurance. And the way that the avoidance was probably of the feeling of uncertainty. So over preparation, getting reassurance from other people, checking and rechecking your work, those are all avoidances of the feeling of uncertainty that actually make the feeling of uncertainty more likely. And conflict avoidance is also avoidance of uncertainty, but can also be kind of the avoidance of the feeling of anger, if that's relevant, or any other kind of feeling that a potential unexpected social experience might trigger. So it's, that's just a really subtle avoidance, but can totally tie into both generalized anxiety and OCD.